In the deserts and mountains of the Near East, two empires stared at each other for centuries. Rome, the city of law and order; Persia, the cradle of fire and kings. They fought, yet somehow neither ever truly fell. This was not a war of conquest. It was a war of endurance, a war where time itself was the battlefield. Welcome to this channel, where history is more than dates and battles. Here, we trace the currents beneath events, the systems, the strategies, the human decisions that shaped empires. Every story explores why the world became the way it is, and why one choice could ripple through centuries. The Roman Sassanian Wars lasted over 400 years. That's longer than the lifespans of most empires. Yet, despite repeated invasions and staggering losses, Rome never conquered Persia, and Persia never destroyed Rome. Why? This is not just a story of battles. It is a story of why empires survive when they could have been lost, and why some wars, unlike others, have no decisive end. By the early 3rd century, Rome had faced near collapse. Civil wars, plagues, and barbarian invasions stretched its borders thin. Meanwhile, Persia had risen from the ashes of the Parthians. The Sassanid dynasty brought a centralized, aggressive state. The two powers shared a frontier more than 1,000 miles long, from the deserts of Syria to the mountains of Armenia. It was a border that demanded constant vigilance, a border where failure was not an option. Conflict began in fits and starts. Persia sought control over Mesopotamia. Rome sought security, trade, and prestige, yet neither side could fully dominate. Their wars followed a pattern: an invasion, a counterattack, a negotiated settlement, and decades of uneasy peace. Behind every campaign lay immense logistical systems: roads, supply lines, garrisons, and spies, all maintained with relentless discipline. Victory was not merely in the battlefield. It was in managing armies over deserts, rivers, and mountain passes where disease, thirst, and starvation often killed more than swords. The early 5th century offers a turning point that shows the system over the individual. The Roman Emperor Theodosius II faced a Persian army under Yazdegerd. At first, both sides knew a direct confrontation could devastate the frontier. Instead of rushing into battle, Theodosius reinforced cities, shored up supply lines, and coordinated with local militias. Yazdegerd, equally cautious, avoided a decisive clash. At first glance, this appears uneventful. No dramatic charge, no legendary duel, yet this restraint was deliberate. It preserved manpower, protected cities, and allowed diplomacy to unfold. In essence, the war was fought as much on maps and letters as on fields of blood. War was never simple. Roman generals often argued for aggressive action. Senators clamored for glory. Persian nobles demanded conquest. Yet both empires restrained impulses. One misstep could mean famine in Antioch or the loss of Ctesiphon. Armies had to march hundreds of miles, in hostile lands, through scorching heat or freezing winters. Discipline dictated timing. Patience dictated strategy. And yet, each campaign carried immense stakes. A single lost fortress could open a corridor to an empire's heart. The tension was constant, but the empires survived because their leaders valued systems over bravado, order over chaos. The Roman Sassanian Wars ended not with a decisive victory, but with an equilibrium. Cities stood, armies withdrew intact, treaties were signed, empires endured. The successes of both sides were not accidental. They relied on centuries of institutional knowledge, meticulous record-keeping, regional administrators, trained professional armies, and seasoned generals. When Rome fell into internal crisis, Persia rarely exploited it fully. When Persia faced dynastic strife, Rome often lacked the resources for a decisive strike. In this slow-motion chess match, patience and planning were more important than courage or ambition. The wars were brutal, yes, but also predictable in their restraint, and this predictability became a survival mechanism. The Roman Sassanian Wars shaped the entire Near East. Cities were fortified, trade routes were maintained, and local powers adapted to a world dominated by two disciplined giants. Perhaps more importantly, these wars delayed other transformations. Christianity, the rise of Islamic powers, and shifts in European and Asian trade patterns all occurred in the shadow of this long rivalry. By forcing both empires to conserve resources and focus on structure, the wars indirectly shaped the political map for centuries. When the Arab armies finally arrived in the 7th century, both empires were exhausted but still disciplined, proof that endurance and systems, not battlefield glory, had defined the centuries-long struggle. The Roman Sassanian Wars remind us that history is often less about decisive victories and more about survival. Empires rose and fell, leaders came and went, but the structures they built endured. In the end, the longest wars are won not with swords alone, but with discipline, foresight, and patience. If you found this story compelling, what empire or rivalry should we explore next? The past is full of lessons in endurance, strategy, and the quiet forces that shape history. Make sure to like, subscribe, and join us as we uncover them.